Today, we're joined by two extraordinary thinkers who have redefined the way we approach productivity and collaboration. David Allen is the creator of the world-renowned Getting Things Done methodology, a framework that has transformed how millions of people organize their work and their lives. He's been recognized by Time magazine as one of the world's most influential thinkers in personal productivity, and his book, Getting Things Done, is a modern classic. Joining him today is Ed Lamont, a keynote speaker, executive coach, and consultant with decades of experience helping organizations and executives across the globe build cultures of trust, accountability, and high performance. Together, they've co-authored Team, Getting Things Done with Others, winner of the 2024 Google Play Best Business Book Award. This book takes the proven principles of getting things done and applies them to the collective level, helping teams move beyond business to real sustainable productivity. In a world where collaboration is both essential and more than complex than ever, their insights could be more timely. David, Ed, thanks for coming to the show.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
My pleasure. I like to think of all the guests who come on the show as superheroes, and every superhero has a backstory or an origin story. So, David, let's start with you. What's your origin story? And then we'll come over to you, Ed. So,
let's see. Born.
It might be, Khalil was born in space, so you never know.
Yeah, born and grew up for the most part in Louisiana, but then went to school in Florida, then got into graduate school at Berkeley in the topic of American intellectual history of thought, culture, not military or political, but more history of culture and thinking process, which I enjoyed. I enjoyed it very much. But the only thing you could do, though, is teach history. We have a degree in history. And, this is Berkeley, 1968, which is a heady time to be in Berkeley.
Sure.
And, there was so much sort of personal growth stuff going on then. And I got kind of tired of studying people who were enlightened, and I wanted my own. So I figured that, college was not the place to get it. So I dropped out and did all kinds of things, exploring meditation, spiritual practices, black belt in karate I got, in martial arts. And of course, they weren't paying people to do any of that, so I still had to make a living. And so, and again, I didn't know what I was going to do career-wise. And I had some friends that had their own little businesses, and looked like one or two of them needed some help. So I showed up and said, "Hey, can I help you out?" And I didn't know anything about, or not much about the content of what their business was, but looked at how they were doing what they were doing. Because I'm, either Mr. Efficiency or Mr. Lazy, probably a combination thereof. And so I look at what they were doing and say, well, how can we improve? Now they call that process improvement, as Clint. And back then it was just how much earlier can we leave today? So I looked at what they were doing, and then I brought some improvement to what they did, and then I got bored. So we found another gig. Then I discovered one day they call those people something and they pay them. It's called consultant. Oh my God. Couldn't spell it, now I are one. And so then, but because I had the background in especially meditation and especially the martial arts, I discovered the value of having a clear head. And, my little consulting practice started to get busier and busier. And so I began to look for techniques for myself where I could stay more afloat given the busyness of my world that was starting to show up. And discovered I didn't wake up one morning with GTD with this methodology. It was a long string of epiphanettes, as I say, the little thing here, and yeah, that worked. And the little thing here, I added that to my thing, and that worked. And then it turned out that I started to develop this sort of kind of a holistic methodology about staying on top of my world. And it turned out that as I was working with my clients, I shared these techniques with them. They needed it too. Their business, their world was highly busy and getting busier all the time. And it worked for them. It produced the same kind of results: more clarity, more focus, more control, more mental space to think about cool stuff, as opposed to just busyness. And so that became a lot of the key of what my consulting, we didn't call it coaching back then, but that's actually what it was. It was more like one-on-one with entrepreneurs and the CEOs of these small companies. And then big head of the human resources department in a big corporation saw what I was doing and said, "David, we need that in our whole culture." can you design some sort of a training around what you've come up with? And we can test it out. I said, well, I'll see. So we did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers with a personal productivity seminar that I designed. And it was probably the most successful training that they'd ever done. This was Lockheed, 1983, 84. And I suddenly found myself thrust in the corporate training world. And I said, geez, as an American intellectual history major in Berkeley, if you told me I was going to be in the corporate training world, I'd say, and what are you smoking? Come on, give me a break. But it turned out that was the rightest audience for what I'd come up with. And they were willing to pay for it. So that thrust me into the corporate training world. And then for the next 2 decades, I probably trained hundreds of thousands of people, mostly American companies, organizations. And my consulting practice really turned into one-on-one, now we call it coaching, one-on-one desk side with some of the more senior people in these organizations that had heard about me, been a seminar I gave or whatever. And so I spent literally thousands of hours with some of the best and brightest people that you'd ever meet on the planet, actually implementing desk side with them this methodology and personalizing it for them. And that thrust me into that world. And you couldn't fool me. As I said, it took me 20 years to figure out what I'd figured out. And then it was unique and nobody else seemed to have done it. Because I have no formal or traditional education in time management, business, or psychology. This was all just street smarts and was my own experience. And, building something that was learnable and duplicatable in terms of what was going on. So then had some good advisors that said, gee, David, you ought to write the book. I said, write a book? How do you write a book? My first action on writing a book was buying 3 books about how to write a book.
Do they have one called Book Writing for Dummies? Is that out there?
Yeah, something like that. It's something like that. And that and I had no idea how successful getting things done in the book was going to be. I just needed to write it, kind of get it out of my head and get it out there. And it turned out it was quite successful. So that thrust me into a whole different world career-wise. Once I'd written the book, I said, I'm done. That was it. I put everything in there that I knew, everything that had been my experience for the previous 20 years. And, but then, God didn't take me away. So I figured, well, I'm still here. Now what? That's a big question. Now what? And then, then I found out that it was actually scalable, because I had no idea if somebody could just read the book and get it or get value out of just reading the book. Mm-hmm. And the first weekend it was published, 2001, first edition, I got an email from a lady that said, David, I got the book, I read it, I implemented it, changed my life. I'm like, oh my God. This is repeatable and it's sustainable and it's something that didn't require me physically, personally to be there for people to get it. So that's a short version of a very long story.
Well,
since then, we've gone global and the book is sold, many copies. And there are a lot of advocates now of getting things done around the world.
Well, your route was circuitous, and I find those are the most interesting ones. There's a song that Baz Luhrmann put out. I think it's not his words, but he took a mock speech somebody gave it at a high school reunion, and it says, don't feel bad if you don't know what you need at 22. Some of the most interesting 40-year-olds still don't know what they want to do with their lives. So that was kind of you on yours.
I was 55 when the book was first published.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I tell kids, relax.
Don't tell my son that. Hold on, I'm pushing him.
Relax.
He wants to relax.
A lot of years, a lot of opportunities still you haven't even seen yet. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
that's great. Ed, how about your backstory?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's in many ways it's similar to David's. We met I think about 2004, and we hit it off immediately. I think because there was lots of commonalities in our stories. I'm, as you can maybe hear if you're good with accents, I'm Canada. I lived there for 18 years, and then I got tired of living in temperatures that could go as low as minus 40 in Winnipeg. So I grabbed a bicycle and came to Europe and cycled around for a year and a half, got exposed to a couple of languages, old buildings, new cultures, and I kind of just fell in love. So I went back and started a university degree, did a year abroad in Germany, went back and finished my degree, and then went to one of the best theater schools in the world in Paris for a few years, and was kind of headed down a track being a performer for a big chunk of my 20s. Had an injury on stage in Japan and had to change careers, so I went into oil broking, which is not obvious, but both of them involve quick reflexes and fast thinking. So I did that for a while, and a bit like David, I had developed a practice of, kind of being able to come to some version of quiet mind or centering. And that practice over time simply made doing that job, which was basically, selling things from A to B in the morning and then selling them from B to A in the afternoon. And then maybe on day 3, introducing C in order for there to be a bit of variety. It began to just feel really meaningless. You can make a lot of money doing it, but it really wasn't working for me in terms of having any sort of impact in the world that I wanted to be having. So in my mid-30s, which is when I started to think hard about what I wanted to be when I grew up, I took some time off, did the exercises required to work out, what are you good at? What do you like? Who do you want to do it with? And came up with a picture that I didn't really recognize, but when I showed it to some friends, they said, well, that looks a lot like, teaching and training. And I think there's a job. I think, one of my buddies said, I think my dad runs a company like that. So anyways, all of a sudden I was into the same world as David mentioned, teaching, training, coaching, consulting. And it was a fabulous job. I mean, an amazing fit for a person with my, skills and desires. And it took off in a pretty big way with, very, serious companies in the world. I was traveling around making good money, doing work that I loved. But I really couldn't appreciate what was happening because I was so stressed by my lack, frankly, as I can see it now, lack of system. And so I think it was 2004. Someone gave me David's book and said, I think you might need this. I, of course, said, thanks very much. And then didn't for 6 months because I didn't have time to read the book about time. And then I did read it. I skimmed it literally like 30 minutes on a plane to New York, heading out there for some more work. And I got 3 ideas that, were paradigm shifts for me about how I could work inside of time. And so then I read the book, I implemented the book. For me, my sense was immediately 25% more productive with less stress. So David basically wrote the book that I needed in order to stop wasting energy. Right, because I was a bright kid. I had a lot of energy, but I was just spraying it all over everything. And so I read the book, implemented, got the value, went to see David. We hit it off. We tried to get something together in 2005, and that didn't work because our schedules didn't map. And then it was about 2009 when I finally, got together with him and another partner, and we started a UK franchise, which then spread to Germany. So for the last 16 years, I've been delivering David's work in the world. And I guess the extension to the story is my contribution, initially to the new book, the team, was being in the trenches and noticing that we were training up lots of smart, motivated people, and then just sending them back into, a metaphorical battle of the Somme, right? Where they were going back into teams that didn't have, clear targets, clear processes, didn't know where they were going, why they were going there, who was doing what. And so David and I had a conversation over lunch, and that turned into, 4 years later, that turned into the new book. So that's again, briefly, my backstory up to today.
I think that I kind of similarly, I was out of high school. I joined the Navy for 6 years, and then I went to college at 24. So I think there's something to be said about maybe finding yourself a little bit before you head straight into school. So
Definitely. Definitely.
So let's talk more about the book, getting things done, basically teams, getting things done with others. So what are some of the principles, or how did you come to realize that the getting things done principles that work for individuals could also be applied to teams?
Well, I mean, for me, it was actually fairly early on in teaching the methodology. I ended up working with an intact team. And as we were going through the horizons of focus for an individual, I realized, those absolutely mapped to a team as well. And then because David had just produced the book, which had a new sort of matrix of self-management, looking at that, it was very clear that there was something on all aspects of that which would work for a team as well. And then the other piece was, in our conversations, David and I realized, there was a whole bunch of stuff that we weren't teaching people that we were using ourselves in our teams, in our organizations, because it couldn't be really taught at an individual level, but it was definitely necessary for teams to collaborate well.
Yeah, and I think Ed had a major key, because frankly, in the last decade or 10 or 15 years, probably, Ed has spent more time teaching, coaching, getting things done within teams, especially at more senior levels, and then watching the value that produced in their cultures when they individually got that. And, I think Ed sort of basically fostered the idea that the book we wrote was more about the mechanics of how a team works, not the really subtle, hard stuff like collaboration and relationships and leadership and all that stuff. But if the mechanics of how a team works together are dysfunctional, it's very difficult to do that harder stuff. Very difficult for people to focus on the bigger game and the more subtle things when things are falling through the cracks. And it's creating frustration and irritation, just on the relationship level for people. So we're not really coaches about the emotional side, but we've certainly seen a lot of emotional goodness show up when people got the mechanics right. You don't have to like people that you work with, but you better know how to work with them. And then, then that is what makes it a lot easier to like them.
If you understand them, it's easier to like them. That's true. What's the most significant challenge in adapting individual productivity principles over to a collective for teams?
Biggest challenge is most people think they're okay, that they don't need to do anything else because they don't have a reference point about what else the else
could be,
of what it could be, and they just haven't seen it yet. So a lot of what Ed and I both do still personally is just we sort of model that, hey guys, believe it or not, ain't much on my mind right now, even though I've got a very busy, successful life and a great career. And the clear space, I think we could both demonstrate that. And so we're kind of the ta-da folks out there. Although I'm not a motivational speaker, I'm not a habit change expert. Our job was defining what the game is, and then people then decide themselves if they want to play it and how long they want to play it and how consistently they want to play it. That's up to them. But it turns out we have a lot of champions that start to do this, and it sticks, and they sort of share it with people around them. So it does work, but it's really more about the mechanics of how a team functions. And mechanics sounds a little mechanical,
right?
But it's the procedures. It's like, I think we use the metaphor, although it's not really so much metaphor as an example. If you like soccer or football, you might have brilliant players individually, but unless they know how to work together as a team, they lose. So it's the same principles, but applied in very different kind of context. So capture is still a critical thing to do, but capturing as an individual might look or sound and quite a bit different than what a team together says, wait a minute, what has our attention as a team? That's a different context.
Right.
And that's what I think we address in the book pretty well.
Yeah. When I read your football analogy, I was reminded when my son was 3 or 4, we started in mid soccer, and, kind of the individual version of this is at 3, they're just all running around doing what they want to do. Then when they get to be older and they're on and they're 13, 14, 15 playing soccer, then all of a sudden, okay, now they're passing the ball. Now they're working together as a unit. And that's kind of the individual versus the actual team aspect for sure.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's challenging is to help people to take simple stuff seriously, because there's a kind of a default in that it should be interesting. It should be intellectually stimulating. It should be new. And a lot of the really easy stuff that people are not getting right is very simple, and they're just not paying any attention to it. And the not paying attention to it starts to create mischief on their teams. So helping people to get serious about simple stuff is part of the job.
Right. And as I like to say about individuals, the reason most people don't fully implement this immediately is, this is going to sound a little crude, but their addiction to stress. And they're not like trying to shoot up stress, but their willingness to tolerate that stress that Ed suggested he was in his previous career. And most people think, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the name of the game. And so they don't really realize what it'd be like if they didn't have that.
Right.
And so,
or they wear that badge of honor that says, I work best under pressure. Okay.
Yeah. And staying late gets you promoted.
Exactly. So you have a concept of healthy high performance is introduced as kind of the team equivalent of an individual's mind like water, which I think you talk about in Getting Things Done. Can you just talk for a minute about what mind like water means and then how that applies in the team environment?
Well, I mean, mind like water was one of the 3 things that, and I think that's true for a lot of people when they read David's first book. The idea of mind like water, I understood. I had a practice, and it was, it never really gets stated anywhere in the book, but for me, it was kind of screaming out of every page that if I could learn to work in the way that David was proposing, I could, be in stillness and make better decisions as a result, even in the worst corporate maelstrom. So that's like a huge part of the attraction for me. But as I've done the work over the years, I've seen that, a lot of people are kind of like, okay, I'm interested. If you say that's possible, I'm interested. So the idea of healthy high performance is the equivalent on a team. It's sort of bumping it up to an interpersonal kind of thing, where you've taken care of enough things that your team isn't functioning as if everyone's hair is on fire, right? So you've done the things that are needed in order for people to have alignment and clarity on really simple things like, well, why are we doing what we're doing? And where are we going? Now, if we just take those 2 things, because there's a few other things we could bring into the picture, but if we just take those 2 things, and if you know that most teams are, well underwater in terms of the amount of commitments that they've made, but if they were students, if they had clarified for themselves and aligned around why they exist and where they're going, then they would be able to use those 2 things as sorting mechanisms for the stuff that comes at them on a daily basis. And if they just had that as part of their conversation, well, is this on purpose for us? No. Okay, well, we need to push back on this, right? Or does that get us faster to where we're trying to get to? Yes. Okay, well, we need to consider that one. But if we're going to consider that one, because we have this concept of healthy high performance and we don't want people falling over on our team, then what are we going to let go of? Right? We can't just keep taking stuff on and on and on. We need to take stuff on and be conscious about, okay, something else needs to go onto a list which is not now.
Right.
So that's kind of the link is really in the individual's experience of Minds Like Water, obviously is different from the team experience, but it's kind of in the collaboration and in the, is that collaboration relatively calm given the circumstances? Is it relatively respectful because you can be? You don't have to shout at people because you feel like it's existential all the time. That's how we got to healthy high performance.
Okay. Yeah, in the beginning of the book, you start off with a couple of surveys that really, they kind of paint a bleak picture. One was the Gallup 2022 State of the Global Workplace Report that found that only 21% of employees are engaged with their work. And then other studies have shown that most people are disengaged and are demotivated by their work, even if they're well paid. Is it hopeless, or do you have some ideas how to address these issues?
Well, maybe not to be too philosophical about this, but people have often said there's a dichotomy between being and doing.
Right.
The being, let's just be, and be present and all that, or let's go do. And they see those as different things. But I think I made the point in the first book. Look, it's possible to be being about your doing. In other words, you could be as motivated doing good work, even if it's work. Mm-hmm. You can be probably more motivated if you're doing what you consider to be good work in a healthy way.
Right.
And, then you're not, you don't need to go home and recover from your day. You sort of live in recovery.
Yeah. There was some movie I saw, I can't remember now, it's probably a couple years ago, but in the movie, it's in the future, and basically the people are sitting on the couch with the 4K goggles on their head being, and they have a clone robot that's actually doing, which I thought was interesting. So they were just getting fatter and fatter being while the robot was doing all the work doing. I hope that's not where we're headed with all the AI stuff. So you caution against, and I love this because I believe process and people are important and software is just an add-on, but you caution against complicated software heavy solutions for what are really human challenges. And I love this, noting that a fool with a tool is still a fool. So what is the most common misconception teams have about technology solving all of their problems? And maybe what's one piece of advice you'd offer regarding its use?
Well, I think we certainly in our work, we're constantly looking at teams and frankly, whole organizations that are living in hope that the next tool, whatever that tool happens to be, right? There's been a few over time, but the next tool, I'm guessing at one stage it was Outlook, and then it was Teams, and then it was Slack, and then and all these things are supposed to somehow remove the friction from how people work with each other. But very often they simply don't address the reason that the collaboration is broken down. So, if you look at just communication and email is not a problem, right? Email works. It works really, really well. It breaks down if people don't know how to deal with email. So just taking that problem and shoving it into Slack or Teams or texts and now, the most persistent fantasy, and this has been around basically ever since I started doing this work, I would say, is that some version of AI is going to come along and tell me what I need to do. So they're going to take away the pain of prioritization from me, so that it will just tell me this is what you need to go do and do it now, or no, stop doing that, go do this. And I believe that it is still and will remain for quite some time a fantasy, because as soon as AI can do that, then you probably don't have a job anymore. Our executive function and our ability to collaborate with other people is kind of the last redoubt of humans in a world that's fast being turned into a place where computers are going to be doing a lot more work.
Right. I think that for me at least, conversations are really important. And I think Jira and Slack and email and text messages certainly have a place, but I do feel people tend to default to them rather than actually have conversations. And I open this podcast every week with a quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it is taking place." And I think when we default to these asynchronous modes of communication, like email or text, I see this all the time where there's a flurry of emails that go back and forth, and I have to step in and say, just stop, pick up the phone, and in 30 seconds you can solve this, rather than having this debate over email where you can't see context. You're reading it whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood. Just have a conversation. And you seem to agree with this because clarity is identified as one of the fundamental principles for teams. So, what can we do to help achieve that team clarity?
Well, I mean, it's as you say, right? So there's got to be a conversation, and we look at a variety of different ways where you could use that clarity. I mentioned already, what's the purpose of this team? Getting clear on that, huge. Where are we going? Getting clear on that. Also, how do we want to do this together? Those are all fundamental conversations, really. And a lot of people kind of get stuck on, let's wordsmith this to death so we have the perfect version of it. And that can take, weeks, months, years. But actually, the most important thing is that we are having a conversation. Whether we have all the words right is kind of irrelevant as long as we are fundamentally aligned around the direction and the purpose of this team. But then you can go on and talk about, are we clear about how much work we already have?
Yeah.
Right? If you're not clear on that, then of course you're going to be saying yes to all kinds of things that you don't actually have capacity for. So the clarity is in the conversations, 100%.
David?
And back to your point too, Clint, that I think it's probably true, and you can validate this through your own experience as well, but I think the two biggest issues most executives say that they have relative to their productivity are email and meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And, they could both suck. Bad meetings lead to bad email, which then we need another meeting because it wasn't clear what what you don't need is another meeting. You should handle whatever that meeting was about to begin with in the most appropriate way. That's getting back to the mechanics of it. And you can downward spiral forever with bad meetings leading to bad communication, leading to bad meetings again, and yada. But, that might sound a little harsh, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
We see that all the time. We walk into environments where that's kind of what's been going on. And then they get used to that. And then they think that's what the work is about. That's what work is like.
Yeah. When I think about email versus conversation as well, I think back to when you were kids and you played the telephone game, which is where, one kid has a secret and they tell the next kid who tells that secret to the next person. It just passes down the line, right? And the fun of the game is that what the last person thinks the secret is not remotely close to what the first person says. And that's what makes that fun. But the problem is that same thing exists in the business world today, and it's not fun because the leader clearly articulates, at least they think they have, their message, and then they are quite surprised and angry when it isn't executed. And to me, it's when I hear your message, what I hear it through the way that I define terms, through my biases, through my filters. Frankly, whether I'm having a bad day or not, it's going to affect the way I hear your message. So if I take your message and pass it to the next person, they're going to hear it through their biases and their filters and whether they're having a bad day. So it's really no surprise that the message gets mangled as it passes from person to person, which is why I'm such a huge proponent of conversation, because if I can ask clarifying questions, and get clarity like you were talking about, then I'm going to have a much better chance of understanding exactly what you mean. So you might say, Clint, turn left, which you think is crystal clear. And I'm looking up ahead and I see driveway, stop sign, major intersection, interstate. So if I can go back and say, Ed, David, which left do you mean? Do you mean left at the stop sign or left at the major stoplight? By asking these clarifying questions, we get that clarity that's so important. So we all moving in the same direction.
Yeah, and then there's the other piece, which is as the leader of the team, or as even on the team, once you have gotten clarity in a particular area, the temptation is to think, well, we did that, and move on, right? So we don't need to discuss that anymore. But certainly as the leader, and certainly with things like direction and goals, and basically you need to bore yourself talking about things like vision. Like I think in marketing, it's something like, people are not going to buy anything until they've been touched 8 times. Well, I would say, it's probably twice that or 3 times that in the domain of vision. People aren't going to buy your vision until they've heard it over and over and over and had the chance to ask those clarifying questions, so that each time that comes up, they're kind of laying down a new layer of taking a sketch and turning it into a painting. Right. So they've got to see the thing, and the first time you describe it, they get a sketch, and the 4th time they've got a sketch with a bit of shading, and by the 40th time they've got a serious multi-color painting that they've fallen in love with, and then you've got the energy engaged.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you said a few minutes ago before I move on, and you mentioned, I'm gonna change your words a bit, but basically you're saying don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough, right? So you're trying to make it perfect and wordsmith it to death. And you actually, in the book, you give the example of when you're writing this book, you had what you called maybe not so great drafts. You pass back and forth and eventually go to the editor, and then you get better drafts. And so we always want to strive for perfection. I get that, but I do find that people get stuck with wanting things to be perfect. And in some point you have to say, look, we have enough. We should just move on. Let's just get going.
And that flexibility is more and more required these days. People often ask me, they say, David, what's new these days, especially with technology and everything else? I say, there's nothing new except how frequently things are new. That's what's new. I mean, your parents probably did not have to rethink their life and their career more than 2 or 3 times if they did that at all.
Yeah.
Now, Clint, you're going to have to do that weekly. or certainly a lot more frequently. Think about it, because there are opportunities that show up that you can't even see yet.
Yeah.
And so I think it was Richard Branson or somebody, maybe he stole it from somebody else. We said there is no luck. There's only lots of preparation and then taking advantage of opportunities as they show up.
I love that. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Because I found that my best friend in college used to say that I was lucky, and it would make me so angry because, okay, it was lucky that I got this particular job, but I had to spend 6 years in the Navy before that. They put me in a place to be able to go to Georgia Tech. And then I got to graduate from Georgia Tech to put me in a place to be able to work at Coca-Cola. So, okay, you can call it luck because on the outside it looks like I got lucky, but under the water, man, I was that duck paddling like crazy. It's a lot of work going on. Ed, you have a great story in the book about this disorganized London meeting. And it kind of was the perfect storm of team dysfunctions. And you even say, no, this was not a composite. This was one actual meeting that happened. So, if maybe just high level the meeting, and then what is one thing you wish they'd done differently that would have had the most impact on that meeting?
Great question. The meeting was, it's in the book, but it was basically a sales meeting gone horribly wrong. They wanted to buy, I wanted to sell, but basically everything from who was going to be in the room, when they were going to be in the room, what technology they were going to use to be in the room, like basically nothing was clear. And so I think we eventually started the meeting. Everybody was present, and the tech was working probably 20-ish minutes into the meeting, and then people were coming and going and dropping off, and we got to a place, and indeed I did close a sale several months later. But the one thing that they could have done was to be much, much more clear with everybody who was supposed to be on the meeting about what the meeting was about. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that kind of goes outside of the meeting which we get into under the heading of working standards, right? So, and working standards are basically a version of your principles as a team, but they're quite granular. It's not like, hey, we respect each other. It is, we show up on time. We answer emails within 24 hours. We, all those things where you can get very granular about your specific business, mm-hmm. But some of them don't need to be specific to your business. If you are running an organization, and most organizations are busy, it simply doesn't make sense for people to show up late for things. And so, but you need to have an agreement with people about that these days, because you don't know what the culture of their last organization was. Or frankly, like in my family, I'm not sure we ever got to church on time, ever. Right. So my family culture was not a great setup for working in a productive environment. I had to, David's work was hugely helpful. I'd done a whole bunch of other work to kind of get that. Like that's table stakes for playing on a team, is that you show up on time, with whatever you promised in the previous thing. So that's where we went later with these folks, was like, okay, so what are your working standards so that you stop wasting all this time in meetings?
Another thing that complicates it in the modern world is, there's a list of things that are new about the world of work. Global.
Yeah.
Virtual. 24/7. How frequently things are due. How, and maybe, I don't know if it's the most important factor of it, is a lot of people don't want to work for a company, they want a subcontract.
Yeah. And
so now you've got people who are not officially part of the work team, and could be fired, and hired and fired. They just work for projects. They don't work for companies.
Right.
So that's a trend that's not going to stop. It's happening now, and global workers that live anywhere in the world and still work on projects and make money.
Yeah.
Sort of, those folks, and that's a huge segment of the population that are going to do that. I don't know where I read this, but it's quite a while ago, and their estimate was by some date in the future, 85% of the workforce in the United States is going to be subcontract.
Oh.
And then think about that in terms of the standards. Now you're hiring somebody, except you're not hiring them, you're just employing them as a contractor on a project. And what standards do they hold? So now you have people from different cultures. You got somebody in Hong Kong, somebody in Rio de Janeiro, somebody in California, that have just now come together and have to try to work together, and 24/7 in a virtual world.
Yeah.
So that has overcomplicated things, and that's why there's such a high burnout rate now. And burnout doesn't mean people are exploding into flames.
Right.
Burnout is really more, it's this subtle stress that people are allowing themselves to tolerate more and more and more, and finally they just go, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, and they get less and less productive because they're more and more overwhelmed. So 100%. Yeah. You guys both work globally, and I found as I do too. And it's funny, the different cultures, how they can impact what you're working on. Like some places I go, this is going to sound stereotypical, but it's just been my finding. But I might go to Brazil, where I've done a bunch of projects, and the attitude is, yeah, we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. We'll figure that out in the meeting. And then I go to Japan, which is one of the countries that I love. And if they don't have homework before the meeting, they're upset because they want to make sure they're prepared when the meeting starts. And then you have all the language, the language barriers, even when they speak English, because most of my clients are US based, they have international interest. And I remember vividly being in a meeting in Japan and having a conversation with somebody, and they're quite engaged in me, and they're nodding their head and they're going, hi, 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 which I take to mean they're agreeing with me. And then a colleague pulls me aside later and says, no. Hi just means I understand you're speaking words and I understand those words. I'm not saying that I agree with you. And then the other one is, I'm told, I don't know if it's true, but I'm told that in Japanese, there's no word for no. And so rather than tell you no, they will say something like, that will be difficult, which means it's never going to happen.
They usually shake their heads and turn like, oh. And then well, it's not quite finished yet.
Yeah, it's probably not going to work. You have another term, and it's called team mind sweep. And you say it's kind of a critical step for capturing collective attention. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, I mean, it basically when we work with teams, one of the first things we do, this comes out of David's work, is to have them do in individual GTD. There's a mind sweep for individuals. That's basically whatever's on your mind. When you bring a team together, they have whatever's on their minds about their lives, but they also have what's on their mind about the team. And usually that's stuff that's probably, if it's on their mind, it's because it's not on cruise control for the team. So just having them externalize all the things that they currently think are not quite the way they want them to be. We don't say that, but that's usually what the list consists of, because they're not really thinking about things that are working well, right? They're thinking about things where they need to, maybe tighten this up a little bit, or customer X needs, or customer Y, we've got to shut that down because they're a late payer, whatever. Those are all things that are on the team's mind. If we can get that out and just park it, actually, as we start working with them, then they're able to be more present, because we've given them assurances we will come back to all this stuff and work out what it means for you, and work out, what needs to happen in order for it to no longer be a problem for you.
Right. You also in the book differentiate between small P individual projects and capital P team projects. So maybe talk a little about what the difference between those are and what are the implications.
The capital P are usually what is the team decided is a project that the team is accountable to produce some sort of result. You are only a team because it's back to purpose. You're a team when the team needed to come together in order to make something happen. But that something doesn't always just show up.
Right.
You got to do some stuff. You have objectives and goals and things that need to get accomplished in order to make the vision happen. So that's why we go through the horizons, and we've identified 6. We couldn't get it any simpler than that. There are 6 levels of commitments that we have. The top level is, why are you on the planet? What's the purpose? What are you really about? Then the more operational, coming down that scale. Down doesn't mean lesser. It just means a different focus. And then you have the vision about, if we were fulfilling the purpose highly successfully, what would be true? What would wild success for this team look, sound, and feel like? That just makes this more operational, because you and I Clint, could have very similar purpose, but the way you're going to fulfill that and the way I'm going to fulfill that could be totally different.
Right.
So then, but once you have the vision, then you say, okay, well, what do we need to accomplish to make the vision happen? So this is where it comes down to the horizon of 1 to 2 years from now, what needs to be true in order to make the vision happen. And that it typically, for a lot of companies, and you probably know that too, Clint, is that, annual planning or annual budgeting. Usually that's the level that this, what we call Horizon 3, starts to show up. But then you need to come down to Horizon 2, which is often missing in a team, which is clarity of role. In order to make that thing happen, the old adage is, whenever 2 or more are responsible, nobody is.
Exactly.
And that's where a lot of stuff sort of falls through the crack. I thought you were going to know you. So clarity of role is a big improvement opportunity for most teams that we work with and have seen. And because the world keeps changing so quickly, those roles oftentimes need to change very quickly. I ask people, how many of you are only doing what you were hired to do? Nobody raises their hand. Right.
Yeah.
So keeping flexible about that. And then you still don't have anything to do till you get down to the next level, which is, okay, what are the things you need to finish over the next few weeks or months? That's projects. Whether you call it capital P or small p, there's still things that need to occur. Small p would be an individual has that kind of maybe project to do. The big P would be, look, the team has to make sure that budgets are clear, that we've got a great hiring process in place, et cetera. And those would be could be some of the bigger projects, and you get a very small projects. We just need to make sure we get new equipment set up in the training room, or we need to make sure that everybody's up to speed on the silent or the new tech, that we've applied. And then you come down to, okay, how do you make any of that happen? And that's the action level,
Right.
what we call the ground level. I mean, that's where an email to send, a website to surf, a conversation to have with somebody, et cetera, down at that level. So those different, we couldn't get it any simpler than that. I couldn't get it any simpler than that when I thought about how do you set priorities. And well, you can't ignore any one of those horizons. They're all real, and they just have very different content, for each one of them.
Yeah, I think.
So I don't know if that's what you were asking about, but
yeah.
I think that's an important piece to this whole idea.
It segues into another thing I wanted to ask about. You mentioned clarity of role, which I find to be very important as well, because in our process, we just let one person have their name on the activity, even if we call that the activity manager, and then even if they have 6 people working with them on it, but I want to go to one person and say, where are we on this, right? And I think there's a story, and it's something like anybody could have done it, everybody shouldn't have done it. And one person needed to do it, but nobody actually did it. So if you have more than one person assigned, it's what's going to happen is they're going to point the fingers. I've been on my own team. I remember going on vacation 20 years ago, and I left my executive team. I had 3 people. I said, I want this done before I get back. And I got back and it wasn't done. And, one lady she was open. She goes, you should have assigned it to one of us because we all thought the other people were going to do it. So clarity of role is really key. You also mentioned that, bad meetings can lead to more bad meetings, and the world is full of meetings, right? I interviewed Juliet Funt, who, I'm not sure it was in Canada, but David may remember from the U.S., there was a show called Candid Camera. And Alan Funt was the host. Well, his daughter she wrote a book called A Minute to Think, and she has a practice around this as well. And basically her premise is that if you could just have a minute before the meeting to think about what you're going to talk about, put yourself in the right place, get it in your head about how you want to execute it. And then if you had a minute after the meeting, to actually take your notes while you're in the moment. But just we have this culture where we go from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting, and you got to try to remember at the end of the day all the things you were supposed to remember. So how can we have better meetings just to make sure we're not going from one to the other like that? Because you say they're important. You need critical pulse taking, I think is what you call it. So
yeah, I mean, it's super simple. Again, this is a big part of the challenge is having people take simple stuff seriously, right? So simple stuff. Why are we here? Does everybody know why we're here? Does everybody know what finished looks like in this meeting? So once we have decided what, can we all go home? Because if you know that, you get it done sooner, you can go home sooner, right? Starting on time, we've already talked about one of the, to David's earlier point about rules, there is, again, a piece in the book about a team of CEOs working on an exercise. And they produce basically stuff that is at the level of a bunch of high schoolers doing a science project. These are brilliant people running, thousands and thousands of people with billions of turnover. And because they did it all as individuals, this exercise, they got nothing out of it. Within a couple of days, just like really simple stuff like, okay, who's facilitating this meeting? It doesn't mean you're the boss. It just means you're facilitating.
Yeah.
Who's taking notes in this meeting? Who's going to keep us on time in this meeting? I think, just to build on Mrs. Funt's idea, never book a meeting for the hour. Book a meeting for 50 minutes. If it's going to be half an hour, then do 25. Make sure everybody has time to at least take care of their biological needs before ending up in another meeting where they can't think because they've got biological imperatives.
Exactly.
So many meetings start with, even if they say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish by what time?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen very few meetings clarify that.
Yeah.
And they really needed an hour and a half for a meeting, and they had to end, in 50 minutes, and then they need another meeting, and some meetings, I know one, client of ours, in the manufacturing world, they have stand-up meetings every morning. Or stand-up.
Yeah.
They come in and say, here's what happened in the last 24 hours. Here's what you need to know right now. And they don't need to meet any longer than just getting that information out.
Right.
And so forth. So, you might need a whole week for a meeting. You might not need anything more than 5 minutes. You just need to know what the purpose of the meeting, by what time do we want to have what true
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Yeah, were you going to add
And
something?
then, the other flip side of this is, the authorization to take your team standards seriously. So in a number of organizations that I've been in, they've said, look, if you get an invitation for a meeting and it doesn't tell you what that meeting is about and what needs to be decided in it, you don't have to go. Like, don't go.
Right.
And you go do something useful, because if they haven't told you why you're there and what you're trying to achieve, then your time is probably going to be wasted.
We've been talking about global projects, and kind of in the same idea with meetings, there's trust involved, right? So, how do we proactively build and maintain trust when we're not in the same row, we're not in the same city, we're not even in the same country sometimes? How do we maintain that trust between us when we don't have that face-to-face contact time?
Keep your agreements. Pretty simple. If you don't have to like me, Clint, but if I produce whatever I tell you I'm going to produce, then you have a certain level of trust that you won't have if I don't do that,
right,
whether you like me or not.
Yeah, I think
so trust and liking somebody and trust are not the same thing.
No, there are people that I don't like that I trust will get things done. So, for sure.
And there are people I love dearly and I don't trust if they're going to show up when they're going to show up.
Unfortunately, that's very true.
The other side of that is, like, I think there is a need in a world where, a lot of us are distributed, working remote, not seeing each other. If you're in that situation, absolutely delivering is going to be number one. But number two is, can you create some time with the people that, isn't in the middle of a formal meeting where you just have a chance to have a bit of chat, right? That's the thing that goes missing with remote meetings and virtual meetings, is that people are just kind of sitting next to each other for 5 minutes with nothing to say. So they do the weather, they do their kids, they do last weekend, they know each other's sports now. I mean, like, it's all happening quickly and very subtly, but that level of knowing someone is also quite useful for getting a feel for who they are.
Yeah, like even on these podcasts, I book, it's longer. I book a slot longer than we actually need because I don't want to come on and say, okay, let's start. I want to chat just a minute to kind of get to know you on some small level before we jump into it. And I find that's important. And then one of the things that struck me about the pandemic was, and you have a whole chapter, a whole appendix in the book about, virtual and hybrid. And I wasn't so worried about people of our age that go hybrid because, we've been around, we know the culture, we understand all that. But I was worried more about people who get hired during the pandemic, who, to your point, Ed, have never actually sat side by side with their teammate. It's only been on Teams or Zoom. And I wonder, how do I learn the culture of a company? Because to me, the culture isn't what's written on the wall. It's what happens when the phone is hung up, when they think nobody's around. How do they react when they hang up with the customer? Do they maintain the same tone, or is all of a sudden, oh, this guy's a jerk? And then how do you get mentored in that situation? So those have been the challenges that I worry about the most when we go completely remote. And then the other one you just touch on, Ed, I think is a huge one, which is the serendipitous water cooler conversation. That you bump into somebody in the hallway and there are conversations that never would happen on Teams because you don't bump into somebody on Teams.
Well, we start every meeting when we meet, and we're a small company now. We used to be 50 people, now we're 5 really. And we start every meeting with the check-in, and we end every meeting with a check-out. And everybody gets to say something. You can't just hide. So everybody gets to speak, and whatever we say, what do you need to express so that you come present for the meeting?
Right.
And that's a very valuable thing that we picked up when we implemented holacracy 15 years ago. So that's just part of the rigor of the holacratic process.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like to tell people to do is I see this as a personal frustration as we have these hybrid meetings, and there's the people in the room, people on the call, and then the people in the room dominate the conversation. And right as the meeting's wrapping, oh, Ed, you're on the phone. So Ed, what do you want to add? Ed's like, well, you took all the good ideas because you got to me last. So, at least you ought to start some of these meetings off by, using the people on the phone first and let them talk. And then you can wrap up with people in the room. So, You want to engage everybody. Otherwise, your remote team feels disengaged, and they're already probably feeling like, if they're truly 100% remote, they already probably feel like other people don't think they're value added because they're not in the office every day. So there's an emotional piece of that as well.
And then we're back to the roles, right? So we talked about roles in meetings, and that, if someone has been appointed as the facilitator for the meeting, their job is not to run, to be the boss of the team,
right? But
just to run that meeting and make sure that the voices that are virtual are being heard and given at least equal opportunity in that meeting.
I want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to start to wrap up here. But what is the single most important takeaway you want readers and listeners to grasp from Team?
I think it's really, really important to come back to, why we wrote the book. We didn't write the book because we wanted people to work more, work harder, any of that. It came from, looking at just how much people had been able to transform as individuals with David's work, and wanting to make a contribution to people finding more purpose, finding more meaning, more joy, let's say, in their work, which is possible if you do some very, very simple things, right? Mm-hmm. You can get people connected on a completely different level. If you just take the time for some simple conversations to clarify a few things, because what we don't want is for people to stay, those figures from the Gallup survey, which subsequently went down, unfortunately, not because of our book, of course, but in the following year, they went down. They can go up, but it does require a conscious effort. Simple stuff done consistently will transform your team's experience of working together.
And Clint, maybe you can appreciate this. One of the things, that we've said is you can snack on this book.
Yeah. Mention that.
Because a lot of teams already do a lot of best practices. Mm-hmm. They just don't think about them, but in order to just even be a team, you got to do some things fairly right. Most people could improve on those things that they're doing, but they don't need necessarily everything in that book. They might just do skim and then see what kind of rings their bell. We have some teams now that everybody reads the book, and then they get together and say, what did you get out of this? Yeah. What do you think we can improve? And, what sort of rang your bell, in all this? That would be our biggest suggestion, I think, would be have everybody read the book.
Yeah.
Or skim it anyway, at least look at what's in there and see, which thing they go, oh, we do a little of that, but we could probably do that better.
Maybe you'll follow Ed's model and you'll skim it in 30 minutes and pick up 3 nuggets that will change your life. You never know.
You never know. Yeah.
So let me wrap up with 3 questions that I ask every guest that comes on. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
For me, the key is, as we say in America, I eat my own dog food. That is, I implement this stuff so that I got a clear head. A clear head's what I need more than anything else to make sure I'm making good decisions, to making sure I'm being as intelligent as I can be, that I'm not distracted, and that I can, fully focus on whatever it is I want to fully focus on. Whether that's my dogs, or whether that's my wife, or what we're cooking, or the major issue we're trying to deal with and grapple with as a team.
Now, for me, it would be what popped into my head was love and service. Unfortunately, in English, we only have one word for love. The Greeks have 6, and that sometimes I think is more helpful. But it's basically, being a presence in the world that is able to be of service. That would be my number one.
All right. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Ooh.
Best piece of advice I was given was the advice to not withdraw, but stay engaged. That is to make sure. And because I call myself a closet introvert, You know, a lot of what I do out there looks like I'm kind of extroverted because I do a lot of presentation, a lot of speaking and things like that. But the truth is, on the break, people think I don't like them. Well, basically, I'm just trying to regroup myself. And so it'd be very easy for me to just, go to the rice bowl and go to the cave and be there without dealing with people. But the best piece of advice I got was, David, don't do that. You need to stay engaged, whether that's with a project, with a person, whatever it is. And so I kind of have to work at it. It doesn't come naturally to go to a party or to have spend time with three people that are inviting me to go to a movie together, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I kind of have to get it up to do that, but it's served me well. So that's what pops to my mind when you ask that question.
Ed?
Yeah, for me, it would be it's not about you. So
are you sure?
Yeah. So we certainly as a young man, I was I was the star of my own movie, and there was that kind of persistent focus on self and what was happening to me, and how was this going to have implications for me. It kind of just tied me up in knots. And someone said, "Look, it's not really about you. Like you've been given certain gifts and talents, and get out there and get going." And you'll see where that takes you. If you spend too much time, worrying about how other people see you dancing, then you don't get to dance. So go dance.
Right.
To mix metaphors wildly. But it was very helpful to me.
All right, last one. What is the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Mine is a book just got published in English. By a Dutchman whom I at least know virtually now, a guy named Rupert Reagel. And it's called Moral Ambition. And his whole thesis is really about, you got very smart people out there that are wasting their smarts because they're not focused on something that's truly ambitious and world's changing, world improving. It doesn't have to be a really big thing, but most of the really good things that have happened on the planet that made progress were because of usually a group of people who started to focus their energies not so much in making money, but in doing good work in the world. And that's what I got. When I read the book, I went, oh God, maybe I think I've been pretty ambitious all my life anyway with stuff that can improve people's lives. But then I thought, I turned 80 at the end of December. And so I said, I'm not done yet. And there's probably some better things I could be doing or thinking about anyway, or focusing on that maybe more, life improving or improving situations or circumstances.
Yeah, for me, it was a book called Legacy by, I think his name is Dieter Helm. He's a professor at Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember which. And he wrote a book about passing on the infrastructure of our world, not just the built infrastructure, but the environmental infrastructure and the cultural infrastructure, the idea infrastructure, passing all of that on to the next generation in at least as good a shape as we got it. And it's really, I wouldn't say it's a happy book, because it just looks at, that we could think about the seventh generation, but most of us can't actually conceive of that. We can conceive of our own children. Mm-hmm. And we should at least have the desire to pass them on things as good as we got them. But the size of that challenge is quite unbelievable, because he's an economist and he goes into the economics of it. We've got our work cut out for us.
Well, I remember there's a couple songs came to mind during your talking there. One was I can't remember the lady who sung it, but it's "I Hope You Dance" as one song. Your earlier answer, and then this answer was Alabama had a song, "I hope we leave some green up below us and some blue up above us," right, for your kids. So this has really been great. If people want to learn more about you or engage with you, how can they do that?
Well, you can buy the book. David's got a website. I'm on edwardlamont.com. Easily findable there. social media, LinkedIn, etc.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time today, David and Ed. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, Clint.